Did Star Fox flop? Well, let's get into it and let's dive into the aspects on whether or not Star Fox would have quote unquote flopped, even though it was only on the market for 5 days before Nintendo's earnings were reported. So let's start with the obvious fact: Nintendo's earnings for that quarter ended on June 30th, and with Star Fox only being released on June 25th, it was very unlikely that Star Fox would sell the million units required for Nintendo to report the game as a success. For those who don't know, Nintendo has two thresholds you need to hit as a game for it to be profitable. The first one is a million sales, is when they report the sales. So if the game hits a million sales, obviously Nintendo will report the sales numbers for that game. That is why we've not seen sales numbers for Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, Star Fox, or Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Now, another aspect is obviously 2 million. The 2 million benchmark is more so where Nintendo breaks even on games where a game needs to sell 2 million units for the game to have broken even for Nintendo. Now, I do think Star Fox has a few aspects working in its favour. The fact it is a remake of Star Fox, and the audience who grew up with the original Star Fox is probably a lot older now and probably has kids of their own and probably would want to introduce their kids to Star Fox, as a franchise. It, to me, is an aspect I think would be quite good and work in their favour. I also think the favour that the Switch 2 doesn't have a ton of big high-profile games yet. Obviously, they've got stuff like Donkey Kong Bonanza, Mario Kart World, and stuff like that. But I think Star Fox coming back is obviously going to be a huge deal for a lot of people because people grew up with Star Fox, and there's been no Star Fox game in about 10 years. And I also think the aspect that Star Fox, it's a new game for a new generation. It's a remake, whatever. But I also think the fact that it's come out now, and it's one of the first Switch 2 games. I think it come out within about a year of Switch 2 launching, so I think that's going to give it some leg room as well. Now, I also think the fact that the digital price of this game is cheaper than the physical price. If you want to buy Star Fox but you don't have a lot of money, you can obviously get it cheaper on the eShop than if you bought a physical game. I'm not condoning getting rid of physical games. I like physical games, but I do see the aspect of where that could benefit Star Fox in sales, with it being $50 if you buy it digitally, rather than it being $60 if you buy it physically, which I think is going to be a good aspect and could help this game, especially as it is only the second Nintendo game that's had that as alongside Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, but which we also don't have sales numbers for. Now, I do also think that Star Fox, because of how notable it is, I think, we will eventually see the game cross 1 million sales, and I think, it might do well over lifetime sales. However, you got to think the lifetime sales of the best-selling Star Fox game is only around 3 million, and you also got to think that the last Star Fox game sold about 500,000 copies in its lifetime sales, which was not brilliant. But I do think this Star Fox game does have a little bit more leg room, and I do think it could potentially at least cross the 1 million sales mark. And you will see loads of videos saying, oh, this game flopped. And really, if you're seeing a video and you're thinking, oh, this game flopped, my argument to you is quite simple. Did you expect this game to sell 1 million copies in 5 days? This game was not reported by Nintendo's financial report because it didn't sell 1 million copies in 5 days. And I don't know about anyone watching this video, but to me, selling 1 million copies in 5 days seems very hard. So, that's 200,000 copies a day for 5 days straight. And I know, yes, you have obviously Star Fox had pre-orders and stuff as well, but I don't think this game will sell 1 million copies in this last quarter. I think when we get an update from Nintendo's financial report, I think we'll have an update on the sales numbers for Star Fox. But I think it might hit 1 million. I think lifetime it might crack 2 million, depending on how well Nintendo does any discounts or whatever with this game, or any more promotion with it, or they might just move on to the next big game now. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you guys think Star Fox flopped? Because personally, to me, I think people would just have too high expectations for this game to sell 1 million copies in 5 days. And if you know that Nintendo has that benchmark where they don't report sales numbers for games if it's under 1 million, then really, did you really expect them to have 10 million sales of Star Fox in 5 days? Come on, guys, be realistic. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you're new, make sure you subscribe. You share the video around. I've been EC, and I'm signing out. Peace.